Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mindful Minutes, the podcast where we decode modern marketing, business strategy, and leadership, one thoughtful conversation at a time. I'm your host, Tanay Sarpotdar, and today we are talking about a topic which is winning cross-border brand and demand in 2026. We are talking global from India, go-to-market strategies. Now, there was a time when going global meant opening an office in London or hiring a salesperson in New York. Today, it's different. A founder sitting in Pune can close a customer in Berlin over breakfast, demo to Singapore before lunch, and negotiate pricing with San Francisco before calling it a day. Technology has flattened geography, but marketing hasn't. Because while software scales globally, trust doesn't. Search doesn't, regulations don't, and buyer behavior certainly doesn't. 2026 has introduced a completely different GTM reality. Your website isn't competing only on Google anymore. It's competing for visibility inside ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, AI-powered search assistants, private communities, newsletters, podcasts, industry conversations, the list can go on. Every geography now has its own digital behavior. Every AI platform has its own understanding of authority. Every privacy regulation has its own interpretation of customer data. And if you're an India-founded company selling globally, you aren't just building demand anymore. You're translating credibility across markets. That's exactly why today's conversation matters. Joining me is someone who has spent years helping organizations think globally while executing intelligently. Today's guest works at the intersection of growth, operations, and accountability. She is a marketing fractional leader who embeds with companies to build and run systems that make marketing commercially real. From AI-powered workflows and media efficiency to customer experience and multi-market execution. What makes her perspective especially relevant is that she doesn't just advise from the outside. She helps teams fine-tune the internal marketing engine so that it stays aligned to both priorities, bottom-line impact, and repeatable growth. With over 15 plus years across Asia, her experience spans premium retail, health tech, insurance, and B2B. She brings both strategic range and operational depth to the table. Please welcome Smriti Dhingra. Hey Smriti, welcome to Mindful Minutes.
Hi, Tanay. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for our conversation today.
Awesome. So today we're talking about what it really takes to build brand and demand across borders in an AI-first world. Let's dive in. For the first thing, we're talking global dreams to regional reality. For years, we've heard founders proudly say, we are global. But being available worldwide and actually winning worldwide are two completely different things. I think the biggest mistake is assuming one positioning, one campaign, one messaging framework can work everywhere. That rarely survives contact with real buyers. I would love to understand from your experience, Priti, how should India or India-founded B2B companies think differently about global GTM in 2026? And where do you see companies over-standardizing versus where should they actually localize?
Yeah, great question. I think what you just said, I absolutely agree with it. Like how you've introduced the session, where yes, global markets are definitely available for us to play in 2026. But just because they're available doesn't mean they're winnable, and that's a completely different set of conversations to be had. So for brands or SaaS companies who are thinking about going global, the normal conversations that I hear within companies is they would normally talk about the main buying signals when thinking about which markets to enter. So for example, you're thinking about total addressable market. what is the digital adoption within that market, or what is the category growth in that market. Those are very important buying signals to decide which market to enter, but it doesn't actually tell you how to enter the market. There, I think the need for GTM strategies is to go in deeper and start thinking not just the buying signals, but thinking about the conversion signals. So, what I mean by that is, when I say category growth, it's very exciting to say that, within your category, there is like so much growth, maybe double X growth than last year. But that doesn't necessarily translate into category maturity, for example. So, you have to really think, is this a market where the product that I'm selling, is the category mature, which means a lot of people have already shopped similar products? And if they're out looking in the market, are they looking for an alternative? Or is there lower category penetration, and which means a lot of education needs to happen for the customer to buy the product? Then you have to start thinking first time buyers. So it's really sort of thinking category maturity is like one of the ways to think about how you would reach a market, or how you would build a personalized context for the market. So yes, so category maturity is one way to think about it, but another conversion signal to think about is decision architecture, because within SaaS, you could have products that are enterprise grade solutions. So of course, the buying journey is a lot more complex, while there could be a low risk purchase, which is just, a couple of dollars, and, you can just it's a digital first purchase. So, you don't really have a lot of information that you need to give to a customer. So how you build the conversations around the product itself can change. And this would obviously be very different for how you approach each market. So, the conversion signals change here entirely. It could also mean that, you have a product that is being sold to a founder-led company where, even if you're talking an enterprise solution, but the enterprise solution is for a founder-led company where where the decision cycle is much shorter, versus let's say you're talking to a multinational, or you're talking to a bank, for example. The same solution going to an organization where the buying decision can get very, very complex, things change entirely. So you have to be really, really sure about which accounts you're talking about, because even within enterprise, the conversations can change so much depending on what level of, like, are you talking to like multinationals? Are you talking to founder-led companies? Things can change entirely. And then the same goes for other conversion signals like trust architecture. We all talk about this. Everyone understands earning trust is the key in B2B marketing, B2B sales. So, it again depends. Is your buying journey a very directly self-directed purchase online? Then the trust signals become more about free trials or transparent pricing. But if it's an enterprise grade solution, or if you're in a market where it's a very relationship first market, then the conversation moves a little bit more local in terms of finding a local partner, creating more local events where you can speak to the buyers directly. So the trust architecture depends on two things: the pricing of the product, and just how much risk is involved, and secondly, the buying behavior of the market itself. Is it a process dependent market, or is it a relationship dependent market? And the conversations of go to market strategy would change entirely. So, these are some of the things. There are, of course, maybe something to think about in terms of cost of failure, which I think maybe stays standardized. So, if it is a high risk product, which involves a lot of organizational input, then of course the decision process is much longer, and you need to have conversations at different buying levels. So, but that I think stays standard throughout. But the three main things to sort of think about is your category maturity, your decision architecture, and trust architecture. So this is, I think, the best way to think about going to market in maybe if you're going to multiple markets. So think beyond buying signals and think more about conversion signals.
Awesome. I love that perspective. And it is good that you've given pointers for people to remember. Category maturity, decision and trust architecture, including conversion signals. I love that because it highlights some things that marketers usually overlook. And one more that I see is localization isn't just translating language. So we've had campaigns where anything for global uh, is a generic campaign, but if you want to do something very specific or doing over standardization or doing localization, it is
Mm.
assumed that it is just translating language. I think it is translating context, and it becomes more interesting when AI starts becoming the first place buyers discovers your brand. So that's that's what I think. Wonderful. This is a good start. On the second one, what I think is let's introduce, now that we've talked about AI, let's introduce AI here. AI search isn't one internet anymore. Um, One of the biggest misconceptions that I see is treating AEO and GEO like traditional SEO. I believe they're not. We already are seeing different platforms surface, different brands, and depending on geography, local sources and content authority are also there. What works inside ChatGPT may not necessarily appear inside Gemini, and what performs in North America may may disappear in Europe or APAC. You've got a global exposure. How should marketing teams approach regional AU and GEO strategies? Do you think companies now need market specific authority building, citations, and content ecosystems rather than simply publishing blogs? Because your main area or your main forte is being a chief systems architect. So I love the implementation angle to it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question. Um, I definitely think that the race for AEO and GEO optimization should not move towards content volume optimization, which is, where everyone thinks if you just put out more content, and as there was a time when SEO was also done that way. That's not the way to look at it. So, while yes, we are now available and visible as brands and as products in multiple places, is something that you mentioned in your intro as well. So, you're like available at much more places, and you're thinking about visibility in a lot more different ways. The way to think about it is thinking about how Google at this point, which I would say is still the mainstay of where AI is taking its information from, even if it's going to websites like Reddit, it's still going primarily channeled through Google. There are no separate technical shortcuts or separate AI schema at this point, right? But what happens is you have to think about the context in which the questions are being asked. When we were thinking about SEO optimization, a lot of our search behavior was just asking one question at a time, because that's how search engines worked. But within an AI ecosystem, you can have an entire conversation, give a very contextual, detailed prompt to AI, and then based on that, the engine goes and searches for information. So what that means is, for the AI, generative AI, or the chatbot or any other form of AI, the conversation then gets split into multiple smaller questions. So what you're doing is you are now thinking, instead of answering one question only, you have to think about how AI is searching for answers. It will take a user query and it is going to break it down into much smaller questions. Google even has a word for it. It calls it query fan out. So what that means is you have to now really think about all the information, contextual information available on your site. So yes, you have to think about yourself establishing authority. So, of course, having a proper website, proper executive profiles, the partners pages, things that establish you as an authority in that market. All of that information needs to be there. But so AI knows it's a credible source. The second thing you need to think about it is thinking about the answer authority. This becomes crucial in the age of AEO, which is thinking about all the questions the buyers are asking. And I think in this space, talking very closely to the sales team is very, very important, because talking to the sales teams is so important because they are in constant touch with the local buyers. They have all customer feedback, all questions, what worked out, what didn't work out, what sales went through, what didn't work through. All of that information needs to be given back to the marketing team so they can actually preemptively answer those questions on the website, because website is not a lead generation tool anymore. It is an actual sales enablement tool. So when you think about your website, you have to start thinking about it as how you would think about your sales collaterals. So, it could include things like technical documentation. I mean, depending on what is allowed or what you can share, but things like implementation methodologies, customer evidence, if you have any original research, all that information needs to now stay on the website, because sometimes a lot of B2B firms would have that in their sales collaterals and not on their website, but now that has changed. So the content architecture has changed more than the technical side of it. And in terms of GEO, I think one of the things that marketers really do is they will look at GEO in terms of where were we mentioned. But that's not enough in 2026, because there are just so many places that we could be mentioned. We have to find what is the most relevant thing for our business. So example, are we appearing in commercially relevant questions? Are we appearing, what are the competitors we're appearing against? What are the sources that are being cited for this, for where we're appearing? And also the most important thing is that visibility creating a direct pipeline, either through influence or through qualified leads? So the visibility is not just we were mentioned, but how we were mentioned, what's the context of that visibility, and who are we appearing alongside? What are the sources being cited? All of this has become a lot more nuanced and a lot more important than, just simply appearing in the top first page of Google.
Perfect. In fact, this really changes how we think, how majority of the company should think about content strategy. The next challenge is visibility, I think. Not visibility, could be, let's roam around trust. From the moment personalization enters conversation, compliance becomes impossible to ignore. Personalization without becoming creepy or non-compliant is something marketing teams should aim for. Marketing loves personalization, but I don't think legal teams love that. At least not always. Between GDPR, India's DP, I think, evolving privacy expectations globally, marketings are walking a very fine line. Especially SMBs that don't have massive legal departments reviewing every campaign. What do you think is a practical playbook for balancing personalization without or with compliance, not without, with compliance? And if you are advising a growing B2B company selling across multiple geographies, any few principles a marketing leader should follow? I know this is part of fractional consulting models, but if you can give a guideline, it kind of paves way to help people understand how a fractional leader should actually think, or how does usually a fractional leader think before coming or before joining hands for a fractional program.
Yeah, I think if you are working or operating with limited resources, and like you said, companies that don't have big legal teams, a golden rule that I would follow is that personalization should feel proportionate to the relationship that you've built with the customer. So, if it's initial few days and you're just talking, then, a lot of like information that is based on, for example, what pages they've browsed, or what topics they're talking about, maybe on their LinkedIn profile. Or if they're on your website, what is the geography or device? Like those are just basic information that you work with to contextualize. Definitely go ahead and do that. Anything more than that should ideally come from like a very controlled sort of shared or declared information. So what I mean by that is, think about how you can provide value to a potential buyer in a way that they're happy to declare more information to you. That's the golden rule. So, think about it. For example, if during a webinar, you're hosting a webinar and then you ask some questions, people answer those questions. So you have some declared information within a webinar, which then gives some context to the sales team to reach out to someone who attended the webinar. Then that is not something that is going to feel, very, I think, it doesn't feel like it's breaching privacy rules. So more and more and more, as you go down that road, because things, like you said, things also change in terms of compliance across countries. Somewhere how data is stored and how it's used is very different across like multiple markets. So, as a marketer, you are constantly sort of thinking about, you're always thinking about what is that fine line. And the fine line, the best way to cross that fine line is to get as much declared information as possible. And this is in addition to, of course, all the inferred information that we get from their behavior, browsing behavior, and everything else that you can get. And all the company information that you may have. So that's one rule to think about. The second thing that I would say is, if you are working with limited resources, a good marketing operational structure is very, very critical for something like this. So what I mean by that is that at your regional or global headquarters, there should be a common global data governance layer. So, you're really thinking about how you're capturing and storing the data. This should not be left to local markets at all, because then it's very hard to control and compliance really becomes an issue. So, when you have a global data governance layer, from there, each market should be able to access their personalized data, which is dependent on their jurisdiction. What is the specific policy of their market or their country? What are the regulations? The data should be accessible in accordance with that. And then, of course, the third thing is always have a clear standard for transparency and control with the customers. Those are the things. If these three things are sort of taken care of, by and large, you are good to go. These are the main concerns that most customers have. If you kind of have these three things under control, there are not like a lot of things that you need to worry about, unless someone's doing something blatantly illegal, which I would advise them not to. But I think apart from that, you don't really run into troubles if this is centralized. How you structure your data, what data is shared for each market, and how much transparency is being shared with the customer.
Perfect. It's fascinating, right? How compliance is gradually becoming a competitive advantage rather than just a legal checkbox. I think it should naturally bring out where buyers are actually spending attention today. So let's circle it to the most important aspect, which usually marketing has been asked: where does pipeline really come from? So not very long ago, the answer to this or every pipeline problem was increased ad spend. I think today we are seeing something different. Communities are outperforming cold outreach. If it's founder led, then founder led content builds more credibility than polished brochures. Podcasts, like the one that we are trying to build, is what generates more trust. Events have become smaller, but far more intentional. And platforms like LinkedIn continue evolving every quarter or maybe even before that. So if you were building a marketing mix for an Indian founded SaaS company targeting global buyers today, how would you prioritize channels? Where do you believe companies could be still overspending or underspending or underinvesting rather?
Yeah, I think, Tanay, you just kind of just captured the first issue that every B2B company would like end up facing. Is the first thing you go towards is more ad spends. I think the natural inclination is to go towards bottom of funnel spends because it's the easiest to measure. And, it's where you can just start justifying ROIs and, so everyone kind of wants to go there. And then, people end up spending a lot on MQLs with weak commercial qualifications. Or you're thinking, or if you're doing maybe an offline event, you sort of start gathering a lot of people without a clear target account strategy. Or you have a lot of marketing tools, but you don't have the operating discipline to really understand how you're approaching each market and how the content is working towards each market. So, the sales teams also don't really have an answer on what is working and what's not working because these rules have not been established. So I think this is the overspending happens a lot more on execution and a lot less on building the right tools to earn trust. The key thing, which I mentioned at the beginning as well, the key thing in B2B is to earn customer trust. This is so crucial to think about when you start going to different markets because earning trust in Japan looks completely different from earning trust in Dubai. So, those are two markets. So let's say both relationship dependent, but let's say in a market like Japan, they are so process oriented that earning trust means having every single process, technical toolkit, everything should be in place even before you reach the customer to meet. It is expected in a market like Japan to have every technical documentation in place because while they value a local sort of a local person and a local contact to be reaching out to them, they also value a lot of process and detail oriented literature. Meanwhile, in a market like Dubai, it is extremely relationship driven. They would first like to get to know you. They would first like to have conversations with the sales team, then maybe the founder or the marketing team or the local product team. So there are multiple rounds of meetings. And once the trust is established, only then do they spend time thinking about looking at the documentation and, what are the technical sort of solutions that you bring to the table. So this is the conversation to think about. Which market are you entering? What kind of accounts are you going to reach? And what is the buying behavior of that market? This is not simply a matter of ad spend. It is really thinking about the cultural nuances of that market because at the end of the day, the person on the other end is still human. And they have a way of thinking and a way of doing business, and you have to really understand that. So when you start thinking about your marketing mix, you have to really think about first the cultural nuances and the sort of information or the sales collaterals you need to earn trust. And once you have that defined, the second thing is something to again think about, which I spoke earlier as well, is your category mix. Is it a familiar category? Is it a familiar category? Is it an emerging category? So, what kind of education do you need to do? Are you just creating differentiation versus competitors, or are you actually educating customers on a new product or a new category altogether? Is it a low risk purchase? Are you just spending $10 online or $20 online to buy something, or are you selling a high grade, high risk enterprise solution? So the conversations shift entirely. The marketing mix will also shift based on these conversations. So for example, if we are talking about a familiar category and a high risk enterprise purchase, what that means is the buying team is most likely aware of the category, maybe even uses a solution that you provide. Maybe they're not happy with it, or they want some more features that the current solution is not able to provide. So your job then is to improve how your product is superior, And how do you reduce the risk of either migration or data compliance or any other, solutions that they, or any other issues that they may have. So then your marketing mix looks a bit of, let's say, account-based marketing. You're looking at a lot of executive engagement at this stage. You're looking at a lot of product marketing. So, you're not going out and doing a lot of spending a lot on search, or you're not doing a lot of like experience or life cycle marketing. You are thinking very seriously about product marketing, account-based marketing, and you're thinking about executive engagement. So the marketing mix gets really dependent on cultural nuances, the category mix, and the type of buying journeys that your product usually goes on. So this is, I think I would say, some of the key things to think about. And the second part to your question was on channels, right? I think the channel is also a very underexplored sort of, I would say, a vertical within marketing. People are not thinking about the distribution. They think so much about content production that, like a lot of marketers, just forget about the distribution. And in this sense, I would say, again, a thumb rule that I follow is that I would give each channel a specific role. That makes it very, very easy to sort of think about the marketing mix and the distribution strategy. So if you try and break the entire buying process into smaller problems and then try and solve those problems one channel at a time. So what is the problem that website will solve? What is the problem that a webinar will solve? What are the problems that communities are going to resolve for you? So across the buying funnel, you want to use a channel, ideally one channel for solving one problem, which then very clearly allows you to establish authority because you create that kind of content. It allows you to have a proper content strategy. It allows you to also put in the right kind of measurement, KPIs that help you understand what is working and what is not working. So then this becomes a lovely feedback loop for the marketing teams to understand attribution, to understand validity of the content, and also to understand the conversions coming out of each channel. So I think these are a couple of things to think about. It's also how we think about things at chapter 2. We also try and always bring in this systematic approach into thinking about the measurement layer, the channel layer, the content layer, and the role all of them play towards conversion.
Wonderful, wonderful. I love the way you've divided the answer. It really reinforces that modern go-to-market is not very straightforward. It is not just about being everywhere. It is about being very specific. Like you mentioned for channels, it's a different take on it, that you have a channel for solving one problem at a time. It's a good perspective on that. So, which brings me to this is all part of a competitive advantage strategy. That's the next segment, which I would love to hear your thoughts on. And this is more on the part where right now we've had all these 4 questions talking about how industry or companies should look at a marketer or a marketing strategy as such. But from a fractional CMO or from a marketing leader perspective, how should you build yourself for giving this competitive advantage, not just for other companies, but for yourself as well? Like every few years, marketing gets rewritten, right? First, it started with websites, then search, then social, then automation. Now AI is reshaping everything again. And companies that builds the strongest advantage, or people who can build a very strong advantage over the next 3 years probably, won't just have better tools, they'll have better judgment, right? So looking ahead to not just 2026, 2027, let's go beyond. What do you think? What are the capabilities that founders, CMOs, and fractional CMOs specifically should start building today if they want to create a truly global brand from India or a growth focused brand from India? And what could be the mindset shift that will separate such leaders from everyone else?
Yeah, I think this is a great, great question because, as we become more confident in reaching out to the globe, to other markets, and not just stay in a very self-contained Indian ecosystem. With that, we also have to change how we think about marketing, because in India, I think the conversation always at some point will come down to a cost advantage. So by default, marketers would sort of optimize for a cost advantage, which is great. There is nothing wrong with it. You obviously want to be extremely competitive from a pricing point of view. But if that's the only thing you think about and that's the only marketing capabilities you think about, then at some point, what you start missing out on is trying to help the brands that you're working with, trying to help them build an intellectual advantage, because that's where the actual winning staying power of a brand is. If you only compete on, pricing, then it leaves you very vulnerable to anyone else entering the market at any given point, because that's what global hubs like Singapore or Hong Kong or Dubai, or even like, farther out in Europe or the US, that's wherever you're playing now, multiple people from multiple markets are also playing. So, cost might not be the differentiation. What you can and should help brands capitalize on is the intellectual advantage. And to build that, the thing to think about is not to think of campaigns as a standalone strategy. Campaigns are part of a bigger GTM and a bigger, sort of commercial strategy that is what is going to make the brands relevant. And what I mean by that is, I think what a lot of marketers end up doing is they end up confining themselves to campaign execution only. But what they're unable to do is take a step back and see how those campaigns are actually helping us build the commercial infrastructure for any brand. And this is where a true mindset shift would really help you become someone who not only looks at KPIs from a campaign point of view, but also thinks about how those KPIs ladder up to actual commercial advantage for a brand. And with that, the conversations become a lot more strategic. You are able to become a strategic advisor to the B2B companies, which is what fractional CMOs should be doing. They should be strategic advisors to the companies they're working with. So you're helping them figure out the right markets to enter. You're helping them figure out the right nuances for cultural nuances or local nuances, for not just localization of content, but localization of context. You're helping them think about how to build an intellectual advantage. And you're also building campaigns in a way, you set them up in a way that they actually help you build learning loops across multiple markets. This is the absolute distinction between, let's say, a mid-tier marketeer to someone who's jumping and talking executive level conversations or C-suite level conversations. The distinction is in between how much strategic advantage you can build for yourself.
Amazing. Intellectual advantage is the keyword for this entire podcast, I can say today. Amazing. Thank you very much, Smriti, for bringing in so many new insights, right from category maturity, conversion signals, decision architecture, then multiple perspectives, one at a time, to multiple question perspectives, technical documentations, personalization versus relationship. I've got my notes. I hope everybody has got their notes as well. Any parting comments? Because that's the summary of our today's podcast. We'll have more, because this discussion is just started. We'll have more conversations in following podcasts. But for today, this is wonderful take for everybody. So any parting comments, Smriti?
I would just say to all the brands and even the marketers who are listening is to really think of your marketing outside of campaigns, and how can you leverage an entire business function to your strategic advantage. That the way to think about marketing is not standalone demand gen campaigns or webinars or running local events. It's how all of that ladders up to strategic and commercial advantage for the business, because that's where you unlock true growth potential, both from a marketing point of view and for your company.
Superb, superb. Thank you once again, Smriti, for joining us today. This this conversation rather reminded me of one that I had with one of a wonderful marketing leader, pretty much mid of my career, this is what he also stated, that India is not going to be rather building a global business from India is no longer just going to be about expanding new markets. It's about earning relevance in each one. And I love how we've had this discussion. I think success comes from understanding different perspectives from marketing leaders. That is the essence of Mindful Minutes. And you have given a different way for even me to think about how do you understand regional marketing behavior, with examples that you gave from Japan to Dubai. It also gives us more to think about how adapting to AI driven discovery is not just looking at it straightforward. Also, we've got notes around how to go about respecting evolving privacy expectations, investing in channels that create trust, not just traffic. So, for founders and marketing leaders, the takeaway is clear. Global growth isn't a template that you replicate. It's a strategy you should continually refine for every audience you serve. To everyone listening, if this episode gave you a fresh perspective, please follow Mindful Minutes, share it with your colleagues, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps us bring more insightful conversations with leaders shaping the future of marketing. Until next time, I'm Tanay Sarpotdar, and remember, the future doesn't belong to companies that market everywhere. It belongs to the ones that understand people everywhere. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye. Take care.